Hey everyone, I'm Bobby Sylvester of the FantasyPros Football Podcast, and today I've got my top 10 fantasy football tips. Let's start up at the top. We're at number 10. I've got draft for upside in the final 5 rounds. Yes, the fantasy season is long, so injuries, busts, and buys are going to happen, but you can deal with depth when it begins to become necessary. That won't happen for the first handful of weeks during the season, so don't hesitate to draft those high upside players who could break out if they're afforded the opportunity. Oftentimes, these are backup running backs or young wide receivers competing for playing time. At number 9, rushing quarterbacks are a cheat code. Quite literally, no one believed Tim Tebow was a better real-life quarterback than Tony Romo or Big Ben, but in 2011, he outscored both of them in fantasy points per game. This happens year in and year out with rushing quarterbacks like Cam Newton and now Josh Allen. Don't draft based on name value or real-life performance, but rather focus on their expected fantasy production. And at number 8, plan on streaming DST every week. For those of you who don't know, DST is short for Defense Special Teams. And more often than not, inexperienced fantasy coaches will draft a defense and just plug them in each and every week. Unfortunately for them, DSTs are wildly volatile because they depend so much on matchups, game script, and even weather. Plan on picking up the best available waiver wire option every week, and don't waste your precious draft capital on the position. Number 7, make yourself familiar with the terms snap count, air yards, and target share. Understanding these 3 phrases is going to do much to give you a leg up on most family and friends leagues. While previous fantasy production is useful, it doesn't quite tell the full story. A player who goes for 98 yards and 2 scores may have done so on just 3 targets, and that is a major red flag. Likewise, if a player is playing 70% of the snaps or getting 100 plus air yards in a week, but didn't put up those numbers, that's great news for his future production. At number 6, touchdown rates are not predictive. There have been dozens, if not hundreds of examples where a player will score touchdowns at a much higher rate, only for that rate to regress back towards the mean the following season. For instance, Cam Newton, Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz, and Patrick Mahomes all blew away even the greatest quarterbacks in league history for touchdown rates, and everyone just assumed that meant they were bona fide superstars year in and year out, only to be disappointed the next year when those numbers normalized a little bit. The same is often true in the reverse, and also for wide receivers. At number 5, and this is an important one, injury optimism rarely pays off. Well, you may think you're getting a great value in the 4th round on a former star who's, quote, only expected to miss a few weeks, or perhaps on the trade block with a stud who's, quote, expected back within a month. This will burn you much more often than it helps you. Now, it may feel sexy to go out and grab that type of player, but you're better off just letting someone else's optimism burn a hole in their roster. Number 4, it is usually best to wait on drafting quarterbacks. This has quickly become a popular idea in the fantasy football industry, but not everyone is quite caught on yet. The idea is that quarterbacks are almost like defenses, in that their week-to-week performance depends so much on circumstance that there's only 3 to 5 quarterbacks you can rely on each and every week. With anyone else, you'd be better off just using the top waiver wire option of the week at the position. Plus, former draft sleepers like Carson Wentz, Patrick Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson commonly pop up in the late rounds and become league winners. Over to running back at number 3, where scheme and volume matter much more than talent. The most classic example of this concept is Todd Gurley going from quite literally the least efficient running back in football under Jeff Fisher and behind a bad offensive line to the back-to-back number 1 fantasy player under Sean McVay and a much improved offensive line. Now, this is an extreme example, but the same theme runs strong at the position. When working with running backs, pay close attention to their offensive lines, stack boxes against, and touches, especially touches on 3rd downs. At number 2, you can often save fab by streaming a week in advance. We've talked about streaming DSTs and even quarterbacks, but really you can do this with any position most weeks besides running back, since every running back starter is surely already owned until injuries happen. If you see that a pass catcher is coming into an incredible matchup the following week, use that final roster spot on it immediately for free, rather than paying the big bucks in fab battles a week later. And finally, at number 1, don't fill your bench with a backup quarterback, tight end, or DST. Your league mates may all own 2 or even 3 quarterbacks, a backup tight end, and a second defense, but that doesn't mean you have to follow suit. Rather, there's virtually no difference between the 15th best fantasy quarterback or tight end or the 20th best, who's definitely available on waivers at any given time. Instead, you should load up the back of your bench with potential league winners like clear-cut backups and a great running scheme. These types have carried fantasy owners to championships time and time again. Alright guys, that's all for my top 10 fantasy football draft tips. Make sure to let us know what you think in the comments section. And as always, like and subscribe for future content. Thanks for watching, and enjoy your football.